One of the major events has been the annual Veterans Day recognition program, and this has become a proud new University of Chicago tradition. In the spring, we have a second event. Last year's theme, the veterans together decided they wanted to recognize those veterans who were graduating across the entire university, and the president came and helped us congratulate this group at a breakfast event. Our plans for 2012 are exciting as well. So in the fall, one of the things that we'll be doing is featuring a workshop for University of Chicago hiring managers so that they can learn the best practices for effective recruitment and outreach of veterans. And this will be in partnership with GCM HERC, which is a consortium whose purpose is to help with recruitment to higher ed institutions. But the program that's really got me excited is our summer and fall program, which we've identified as a multimedia University of Chicago Veteran Story Collection project. And our intention is that the core of the presentation of this Veterans Day program will be the presentation of the stories that we've collected. This work has been professionally and personally rewarding for me in many ways, not the least of which has been getting to know the veterans here at the university, especially the strong women that I've had a chance to meet who are here. It also has continues to expand my awareness and my knowledge and my experience. And an example that I just want to share with you is that this past memorial remembrance, this past weekend, we had a multi-generational family gathering, and a central part of that gathering was recognizing those in our family who are still living and who served in the military, and especially my husband, who served in 1970 and 71 in the 101st Airborne Division. We also took time to recognize those not present who are no longer with us. In particular, my stepfather, who joined the Army and served as a Korean combat soldier. He also volunteered to serve in the rear in Vietnam to support the men who were there. He opened a world of opportunity for my sister and brother and I, who sort of proudly wore the badge of Army brats. And through living overseas and on the West Coast during the tumultuous coming-of-age times for our country, the 1960s. And we're still realizing and passing on the benefits of those growth experiences, now going to my young grandsons. And so I'll close by saying, that the final part of our remembrance last weekend, we expanded our family of veterans to include, as I explained to my almost 4-year-old grandson, my discovery that his great-great-great-grandfather, for whom he's named, left his Mount Pleasant, Ohio home, and he had 5 children at the time, and to join D Company of the 9th Regiment of the United States Colored Heavy Artillery on September 2nd, which happens to be my daughter's birthday, in 1864, so that he could fight in the Civil War. I don't know if I would have gone looking for these records if I hadn't been faced with the honor of doing this work on behalf of the University of Chicago. So again, thank you for letting me come.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Fountain Walker, and I will be the moderator today. So looking at the makeup of the room, I think we'll be able to have a really good time. We'll have some really good interchange. My goal is to have our panelists have some really open and honest discussion with each other. We have some questions for them to answer, and I also have a Q&A period where we can all kind of sit back and also have some discussion with you, some things that may be on your mind. So ultimately, we're going to leave it kind of open in that regard. So we're going to kind of relax. Is that okay with everybody? All right. Anissa, as always, brings kind of a tear to my eye because I do have tissue and I just love her to death. But you did forget to mention that there's some Marines in your family. I heard you say Army several times.
I couldn't list everybody.
All right. Okay.
But my stepson is a Marine.
All right. Just so. As you all may know, if you didn't know, I'm also a Marine Corps veteran. So again, we'd like to welcome you all and welcome back to University of Chicago. You haven't been here for a bit, so welcome back. I'm going to begin by letting everyone introduce themselves, and we'll start with Katrina Johnson.
Hi, my name is Katrina Johnson. Just to give you a 60-second of my military career. I was born in an Army hospital thanks to my father, who happens to be here. He went to West Point and spent 22 years in the infantry. So I too was an Army brat and got to grow up all over this great country, including Hawaii, which was our favorite place. And so when it came time to go to college, I did not go to University of Chicago undergrad, sadly. I went to WashU in St. Louis, and my dad, handed me a ROTC pamphlet, which I knew nothing about, and said, "What a great way to pay for college." And they also promised me a car my junior year, which I did get eventually, a 1992 Nissan Maxima. Which lasted through law school, barely. My mom was just saying, "I remember when I had to come pick you up down at the law school because my car was broken again." But anyway, I went to undergrad in ROTC scholarship, Army, of course, because there was no other option in my family. And I decided I didn't love the professors. And, my military, what I knew was, what they were teaching me. And I was like, you know what, I want to be around the smartest, the brightest, so I'm gonna go to law school. That was really my reasoning, is I didn't really want to do anything else, so going to law school seemed like a good option. So I took an educational delay and I went to law school and spent my time here at University of Chicago, just across the Midway, and graduated in 2006, and I owed the Army 4 years of my life, and so I joined the JAG Corps, and because that was the most sensible thing to do since I was a lawyer at that point. And I spent 6 lovely years in the Army as an Army JAG, and I spent my first 3.5 years at Fort Hood, Texas, which was a great time, and I never want to go back there, but I had a lot of great experiences. I went to Iraq for a year from Fort Hood, where I was the brigade judge advocate, basically the counselor to an Army brigade commander, and we were in a tiny province up in northwest Iraq. And then they allowed me to go get out of Texas after I came back from Iraq, and I spent my last 2 years in Washington, D.C., and I was at the National Security Agency, which was a great experience, and got to connect with another alumni from University of Chicago who actually had a very similar track to me as an Army JAG, and she's here, Elizabeth Johnson. So it was lovely to connect with someone with a similar experience. And I just got out on May 7th. I started my terminal leave. And sadly, I actually put on my uniform for the last time thinking I would be really happy, and cried all the way to work. So very bittersweet. And I'm starting at a private law firm in DC on Tuesday. So that's been my career.
Next, we'll have Brian Penoyer.
Hey, good morning or good afternoon, everybody. My name is Katrina Johnson, and no, I'm just kidding. I'm a captain in the U.S. Coast Guard, just wrapping up my 22nd or 23rd year, something in that vicinity. And I'm native Chicagoan. My family is from Hyde Park, believe it or not. There are such families, believe it or not. She grew up, went to school about 4 or 5 blocks that way, and grew up walking through this campus. And Those were Depression days, and as she went through the campus, she essentially made herself a vow that though she herself was not going to go here, someone in her family would. And so, as the last of 5 children, I was the designee. So I got to come to the University of Chicago undergraduate. I did that from 1984 to 1988. Great time to be here. Very different time. Very different university in some regards than it is today. And then after bouncing around for a couple of years, I went to the Coast Guard Officer Candidate School, and from there spent the next 20 years bouncing around a variety of coastal operations. It's right in the name, Coast Guard, in case you're wondering what we do. So it's been a fantastic experience. When I was here, I was a physics major. I was quickly convinced I needed to be a political science major, as many physics majors are, and refused, declined. I said, I'll do anything, just please don't put me in U.S. politics. So it's only ironic that I would end up where I am today, which is the chief of Coast Guard Legislative Affairs on Capitol Hill. As a matter of fact, I owe my career in the Coast Guard to a University of Chicago professor, Bob Bianchi. Professor Bianchi taught at the time international relations, particularly Middle Eastern politics. I was fascinated by it. I couldn't take enough of his classes. Anything he would offer, he was teaching dog catching, I was taking that class. So as I approached 1988, and those were in some ways similar times to today, tough job market, hard to figure out what I was going to do. It used to be that you could pretty much count on people to recruit on campus and you could get a job pretty quickly. Not so much in 1988, pretty tough time. What will I do? I wasn't smart like Katrina, so I said, I know what I'll do. I'll start applying to graduate schools generally. And I went to Professor Bianchi and I said, sir, I would be honored if you would write me a recommendation to go to graduate school. And he said, Brian, I will be happy to write you a letter of recommendation. However, you will not like the letter that I would write. Because you have no idea why you want to go to graduate school. And in fact, I predict that you will not do well there because you're really unfocused and you don't know what you want to do. I was shocked, abashed, and ultimately I can't pay the man enough tribute because he was exactly right. Like I said, took a deep inhale like many of us have in that time frame and ended up in the Coast Guard. That was a remarkable experience for me and continues to this day because it was a place, and I think this is one of the things that I find most interesting in a conversation like this, how the military culture exists and what it does and what it did for me and what I think it does for many is it extends the opportunity for responsibilities and opportunities which no one in their right mind would give a person that young. What a fantastic, fantastic organization that would do that and let people mature and develop into those enormous responsibilities. So with that, I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you. And Tobias Schweitzer.
Good afternoon, and thank you, everybody. I see a lot of familiar faces, and this is wonderful. Glad we're having a chance to have this conversation, which I hope is the first of many that our group will have on this campus and engage with the community and share our culture with you and learn from you and give back to this in a spirit of service, to the university from our perspective. I didn't come from a military family. I was 15 or 16 years old, going through high school, doing reasonably well, trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life, and a peer of mine was being recruited by the Air Force Academy to play football, and he handed me his application packet or some information, and as soon as I opened the pages to it, it hit me right here, like this is what I was supposed to do with my life. This is my vocation or career. And I had great recruiters who helped me. They said, I know you want to do the Air Force Academy, but you should apply to all the ROTC programs, all the other academies, cast a wide net, see what comes back. I basically had the choice. I did not get into the Air Force Academy. I didn't get accepted. That's okay. Between going to West Point and taking an Air Force ROTC scholarship to come here to the University of Chicago. And I had another good mentor, peer of mine, or teacher of mine, who said, well, you're probably going to spend your career in the military. Why don't you take this time and go to a civilian school, get exposure to the people and the ideas and the institutions that you're going to be probably not exposed to through most of your career. And it was great advice. I had a wonderful time here. I learned a lot. I grew as a person. When I entered active duty upon graduation, received my commission, I decided along the way that I wanted to be a helicopter pilot. For some reason, flying low to the ground, getting shot at, was appealing to me at a young age. It no longer is, but I was very fortunate. I got to go down that track. I entered pilot training, finished, got to do special operations, which I'm still part of. I flew the MH-53 helicopter, multiple tours in Iraq, in counterinsurgency and counterterrorism operations. 2008, I got picked up for a educational program where I got to go to Santiago, Chile for 2 years of graduate study and learn Spanish, and then came back, and currently now a foreign advisor to militaries, and my focus is on South America and Latin American regions. Thank you.
Okay, so I guess we'll go ahead and we'll get it started. So the first question that we have for this group: how does the military officer of today differentiate between the military mission and their moral compass? Thinking about Middle East, Hurricane Katrina, and different events or worldwide events. And we'll go ahead and we'll start with Browne.
Thank you.
Easy ones.
Yeah, so that's an easy question. Next. Actually, I will go back to just to talk for a moment about Katrina. I had the honor of twice being drafted by Admiral Thad Allen. First time because he was deranged, and the second time because he knew how I would perform, which is badly, but he needed somebody with my profile. He, at the time, was of Hurricane Katrina, was the Chief of Staff of the Coast Guard, which in our world made him a 3-star admiral, pretty much the operational guy for the nationwide Coast Guard operations. The Coast Guard as a total force at the time was somewhere in the vicinity of 42,000 people, which for those of you with military background, you know, as a service, that makes us a good battalion. It's not a lot of folks to be spread across all the entire United States territories, our territories and possessions, and quite a few foreign ports as well. The Department of Homeland Security had recently been formed, and we then saw Hurricane Katrina bearing down on New Orleans. Mayhem ensued, and into that storm, the Secretary reached down, grabbed Admiral, and said, "I need military chain of command. Please take charge." So he went to New Orleans first. He later then assumed the same role for the larger area. The Admiral's laughing, he knows this story pretty well. And in that mix, Admiral Allen was confronted, as I was supporting him in that role, as he was the principal federal official trying to bring all the forces of the nation's power to bear in some sort of concert. He was confronted many times, and I watched him do it, with, I would say, a question wherein there was plenty of ambiguity in his mission. What the president had asked for, or what the secretary had asked for, was pretty vague. And he would always revert to the moral compass that Fountain mentioned. One particular instance, I remember we were chasing the question of displaced persons and how they would receive their payments for anything that you can imagine, their paychecks, their medicine, their so on. And it's, as you can imagine, with that kind of displacement, it was not easy. We didn't know where people were. They were dispersed across the other 49 states and in some cases overseas. And essentially the answer came back, we can't do that. And Admiral Allen said, maybe I didn't make myself clear. We will treat these people as though they were our family. Would you accept it if your grandmother's Medicare check was not delivered? Would that be okay with you? Because if it's not okay for your grandmother, it's not okay. Right. And we did. We made it happen. So there you have it.
Yeah. Correct. And so, and in saying that, so basically your observation is that, and coming from the Admiral, it's not an option. We're going to take care of it. Katrina, what do you think?
So I was a legal advisor, so I didn't get to make my own decisions. I advise commanders. And there's a legal advice that we give called legal but stupid. And so most of my commanders were, I loved my brigade commander. He was an incredible leader, incredible man, very intelligent. And, he would say, hey, Katrina, we have a mission. We need to make it happen. You need to get to yes. And so it wasn't really an option. I had to find a legal way to get to yes. And almost every time it was pretty easy. Sometimes I had to think creatively. But you think about the legal but stupid. And what that means is, yes, sir, absolutely, we can do it. I can find a way for us to meet the mission requirements. But it might not be the smartest thing. So you always, in today's world, in today's environment, commanders have to think about the CNN factor of, if this ends up on CNN, how is it going to make us look as the United States, as the Army, as a commander? And you're the one that has to make that decision. I couldn't make it for him or her. I had female commanders as well. And, sometimes, especially with the younger commanders, with the company commanders that are on the ground, they're out there, and they just want to get the mission done. They are so focused in, they're in the weeds, they're right there, that's all they think about is the mission. And so sometimes it was my job to reel them back a little bit and say, if this ends up on the front page of the news, how's it going to make us look? How is it going to make you look? And it happens. And people make bad decisions all the time. And I don't think it's necessarily because they want to, but they're in the moment, in the mission, trying to do the best that they can. But in our world today, with Twitter and Facebook and news flying everywhere, commanders have to look at that perspective as well.
Legal, but say that again?
Legal but stupid.
Okay, I have to keep that in mind. In my line of work, I'm a police officer, so it's just kind of, okay, I get it. All right, Tobias?
I guess the only thing I can add to that is, I think Katrina said, I think almost everybody has a very strong moral compass in the military. When people are tempted to put that to the side, is trying to accomplish the mission, like, well, this may not be morally. I think also people see that they take the short-term look at something and they don't understand the longer-term implications. I just came to me, I think of an example. We were in Iraq, middle of the insurgency, things are not going well, a lot of pressure, try to capture every bad guy we could in the region, and we just made a public statement that we were not going to enter mosques, we were not going to something about that. And that next day we had slated a raid on a mosque on the daytime, and I mean we were all sitting there scratching our heads, holding up our newspapers, and there are very good reasons, like this is going to upset the population. Yes, we could catch one guy one day, but then it was going to upset the whole town, and we'll never have their support again. And so, thankfully, the mission ended up getting canceled. We didn't do it for multiple reasons. But those kinds of things end up all the time. You have a piece of intelligence, you want to go get that bad guy, you want to do it, but you have to sometimes throttle back and realize there's a bigger picture, there's second-order effects that can end up hurting your mission in the long run.
Well, just a little bit. So what was the impact on the individuals that were with you at that moment in making that decision? How did they feel? And what did they tell you?
I think everybody was torn. We knew where the guys we were trying to capture were. We knew we had excellent intelligence. Everything was telling us there. But to have done that mission, in the middle of the day, I think it was even on a Friday, so there could have been civilians there too. I mean, it just would have been messy. So I think we were all pretty clear that we just, this is not smart. It's not a good idea. We can come back tomorrow. We can just wait a little longer.
If I can add to that, just one thing. I don't mean to sound like I'm going to sound like a Thad Allen groupie. I apologize, but he was great for tossing out aphorisms, and one of his that I love was act with strategic intent. You see this all the time. It's the same thing. Legal but stupid. Acting tactically smart, very smart. Make the raid, get the guy. Very smart. That's not a new challenge, but it is a more visible challenge in today's media. So acting with strategic intent.
Okay, so now we'll move on to question 2. What is the military's role in shaping foreign policy? Why does the military conduct foreign affairs and security assistance? And if you don't hear the question, just go ahead and I'll repeat it, not a problem. But this is a 2-part question for the panel. So I'll read it again. What is the military's role in shaping foreign policy? Why does the military conduct foreign affairs and security assistance? And we'll start with legal but stupid. Go ahead, Katrina.
Well, I actually tend to believe that foreign policy should be shaping the military, not the opposite. And we have come into problems with that in, Afghanistan, is that we were doing exactly that. The military was shaping foreign policy. And then General Petraeus came up with a great idea and wrote a book about it that was actually published by the University of Chicago Press. And it was COIN, the Counterinsurgency, the U.S. Army Marine Corps Counterinsurgency Field Manual. So it's kind of exciting that I found out one of my friends works for the University of Chicago Press, and he told me last night that it was published here. So, and in this manual, which changed how we conducted ourselves in Afghanistan, and we were doing it all wrong, completely wrong, in that we were using this big force of military power to try to shape change, and that wasn't working. And so in this field manual, it's basically doing the opposite. Some of the things it says is success in counterinsurgency is gained by protecting populace, not our actual force. So it sort of changed the way we did things in that we're allowing the actual populace in Afghanistan to continue to do what they need to do. We couldn't shape them. And so I really think that military should not be shaping foreign policy. It should be, foreign policy should be shaping what we do as a military.
Tobias?
So as a security assistance guy, I'm doing foreign internal defense. I have a slightly different take. I agree wholeheartedly that, our direction comes from top down. It comes President, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, et cetera. However, the military has a huge role to play in our foreign affairs, and we interact with our military counterparts all the time. And it's important that our not just our military advisors, not just our admirals and generals, but everybody has a sense of cultural awareness that when I'm interacting with my partner, as my partner, not my subordinate, but my partner in another country, that I know how to respect them, their culture, and what we're seeking is a partnership in a lot of places that we either have an ally to count on in a future war, so we're very interested in developing their capabilities so that in a resource-constrained environment in the future that the burden doesn't have to fall on the United States at all the times. Secondly, there's a lot of countries that have very difficult and precarious security situations that would be exacerbated by putting thousands and thousands of U.S. troops in their country, but that perhaps a better way to help them is by helping them help themselves, whether that's through developing their own capabilities. And so you have these captains and sergeants who are on the ground. It's not colonels, it's not generals, who are in the jungles hiking around with these guys or teaching them how to fly their helicopters. So you're counting on this person who's 25, 35 years old, not to create an international incident by insulting somebody or treating them like an American would be treated in that situation, and having cultural awareness. So I agree. Our policy comes from the top down, and we execute it as we see. But we have to understand that what the military does affects that foreign our perceptions abroad and our foreign policy as well.
So, and I'm going to come back to you, Katrina, because now I'm curious to know how much of a corporate partnership is there with the military in shaping that foreign policy?
Well, obviously our Chairman Joint Chiefs of Staff sits on the National Security Council, and the military should be regarded as advice givers, not and advice only.
Do you think the corporate or the capitalist kind of machine pushes that any?
Not necessarily. Well, I'll give you an example. Recently, in the Harvard Business Review, recently published a long, very interesting interview with Admiral Mike Mullen, now retired, former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He said in his 2 years, he went to Pakistan 47 times, I think, in trying to repair and heal and grow our relationship with the Pakistanis, which unfortunately went south a couple years ago. But that was very important to him. And he didn't go on his own accord. He went on the blessing in behalf of the president to try to bring us together closer in our counterinsurgency and counter terrorist efforts. So.
Brian?
Oh, I suppose I'd just add just a slightly different twist on that question. Speaking of the current chairman was just speaking about Syria yesterday, 2 days ago. They were asking more or less what the United States could or should do militarily in Syria. And his response was, I thought, directly to this question. He said, we have a variety of options, and my job is to provide the president with options. It's not my job to decide what the policy of the United States is. And it got me to thinking, as a typical UFC fashion, random synapse linked to a book I happened to be reading about the initiation of the war in the Pacific during World War II. We know of a society in which the military determined national policy. It was Japan prior to World War II. That is not the United States system. That's not a system that we want. Sort of a more interesting question is, what are the qualities of those options that you present the president? And to Katrina's earlier point, are there legal but stupid, militarily executable but stupid courses of action, options that you present to the president? What options do you put in front of the president? That's a tough question.
Katrina, if you would, just kind of, again, going back to what I mentioned to bias was more or less the corporate, or maybe just from a business standpoint in conjunction with the military and their operations. What do you think about that?
Well, I do agree with Tobias in that our partnerships, our military partnerships with other countries, I don't think the public really knows as much about. And until I joined, I didn't really know that we do all this joint training exercises with all different countries, not just with our close allies, but all kinds of different countries that will come and train with us. And I don't know in what other aspect we do that in the government where we're so involved with other countries. Like the Georgians just came and trained with us, and all different countries. You have no idea, and it's never in the papers, but that we do have this military connection because we're all doing the same thing. We're training to fight. And so you have that, it's almost like art, like a common language, fighting. And so we have all these relationships with other countries and do all this training. And I think that I don't know where we do that except in school, but where we do that in other parts of the government, where we do have that interaction with other countries that I think helps build our relationships with those countries.
So now this next question is truly targeted at Katrina. So, and it's intentional, because when you look at the military and its makeup and a lot of other entities in the world, women in leadership, they are the minority. So question number 3 is, describe your experience as a female officer in Iraq, dealing with fellow officers, and with local Iraqi judges and politicians.
Okay, so in Iraq, I was the only female on the staff. The chaplain was African American, so we were team diversity, the two of us, the special staff. And so I was the only female, and I was like 15 years younger than everyone. And it's difficult at first, especially me. I'm bubbly, I'm blonde, so it's going into a room full of a bunch of big men who are pretty serious, and I tend to joke around a lot. So it was coming into my brigade even before we left was a little bit difficult, but I'm extremely fast and athletic, and once I beat my battalion commander in our run, he listened to me a little bit closer. But in Iraq, we were in a very small FOB. There was less than 50 women. We had one latrine, which was terrible, because if it went out, you were out of luck. And again, only female on the staff, and I was the highest ranking woman on our FOB. I was a captain, and there was one other female lieutenant, and the rest were enlisted. And so it was, yes. Oh, sorry. Forward operating base. And actually ours didn't even qualify as a FOB. It was a COB, a contingency operating base. It was just, we didn't even have buildings. We were basically in tents. And so I got along with the staff, and again, there's this male going back forever, is I don't know how many women they had worked with in the past, but once I started giving my legal advice and giving good advice, mostly, they listened to me more. And in that, it actually, a year there, and I went to cigar nights on Fridays with near beer with them, and we ran together, and so that was really ended up working out really well. I had a great experience as a female officer, as part of a staff, as part of a group. And so one of the things that I did was to build relationships, to build rapport with the local judges. And I don't know why we weren't doing this from the beginning, because we're trying to build law, the rule of law and order in Iraq, which they didn't have. As I went around and spoke and met with the local judges, some of the local attorneys, actually one of the local JAGs I was training, Iraqi officer, an Iraqi JAG, and meet with them to discuss what we could do better to keep the bad guys locked up.
Could you explain the acronym JAG?
Sorry, Judge Advocate General Corps. That's what I am. That's the military lawyers, and it's across the board. They have Navy JAGs, Air Force JAGs, Coast Guard JAGs, Army JAGs. So anyway, that was very, very difficult as their culture. As a woman, I would always be the only woman in the room. I had a security crew of 15 guys that came out with me because my commander did not want to lose his one lawyer. So it was great. I felt I'm like bebopping down the street with my law books, and I've got these 15 guys around me with heavy weapons. And so meeting with the local judges, it took many visits, and I had an incredible interpreter that would meet with me, because whether women not being able to actually talk to the person you're talking to, which is a completely different language, and talking about law, which most people in the room who haven't gone to law school wouldn't understand the same language if we were just having a legal discussion. And so he met with me for hours beforehand, and we would discuss what we were going to talk about to try to get the point across. And a lot of time my questions were met with questions of, are you married? Why aren't you married? Is your father upset about the fact that you're not married? You can ask him. And actually, one funny story is I got permission to build a courthouse. We didn't have a courthouse in our town, the town of Talafar, which, how are you going to have law and order without a courthouse? I have no idea. They didn't. I got permission to build this courthouse. So we had this big meeting with the mayor and this big political guy. They called him the Tony Soprano of Nineveh. And he basically ran the whole part of the country because he had the money. They're all in mud huts. And, we're trying to have a conversation. My interpreter's doing a pretty good job, because you'd have to ask the same questions over and over to see if they understood you. To sort of get back, but of course they wouldn't shake my hand. They stood pretty far away from me. And the Tony Soprano of Nineveh kept asking my interpreter questions, and my interpreter kept talking back, and they're going back and forth for like 10 minutes. And I'm like, what? Tell me what's going on. He's like, you don't want to know. I'm like, tell me what's going on. He's like, he's trying to buy you. I was offered 60 goats, which I think is a pretty good price, as it turns out. And I was like, I'll have to go back to my father. My father said, throw in a couple of Mercedes and we'll start talking. But honestly, that was the end of the meeting. I couldn't get any further with them when he was literally trying to bargain with my interpreter over, the amount of goats I was worth. And as much as I like goat cheese, that, was not an option for me. And so it ended. And so I had a lot of problems really getting my point across. And I had this sheet of paper that said, the head chief judge in Iraq wants to build you a courthouse. Let's talk about this. And it was a very big barrier for me.
Being a woman in that situation, sort of, you talked a little bit about not shaking hands and trying to sort of keep distance.
Mm-hmm.
What other local customs did you choose to adhere to, and which ones did you not choose to adhere to in terms of expressing both an appreciation for their customs, but
Mm-hmm.
also trying to make sure that it was understood that you're not necessarily always part of that system?
Right.
Can we make a note of that, so that when we get to the end of the Q&A, then we can bring that up? Because I wanna kind of look at and put Brian and Tobias on the spot a little bit and just ask them very simply, how did the military, especially in your positions, prepare you to deal with women you serve with? Or did they?
You go first.
You go first.
Yeah, throw me to the wolves. I mean, we get the typical yearly diversity quote training, like most people blow it off, men, women, minorities, everybody. We all just think it's just an insult to our intelligence. I really think like the most way to break that barrier in any military setting is just pure competence. And I think one of the reasons you were, I would assume those men, your commanders and the staff accepted you because you were an incredibly competent person. You weren't a 6 foot squared, jawed infantry guy, but the moment when you knew what you're talking about, they're like, oh, okay, she's one of us. Same with, it's across the board, and it really doesn't really matter what you look like, religious orientation, sexual orientation, race, gender. People are really just looking for a competent, incredibly dedicated teammate, and that comes in many different packages. So I don't see it as much of an issue.
I'd add for the Coast Guard, we're in a little bit of a weird spot on this subject because as opposed to the other military services, the Coast Guard, by its very foundational creation, is essentially a civil agency run in a military fashion so that it may provide those same civil services, law enforcement, search and rescue, et cetera, safety, security, and stewardship, to the military in times of war. So we essentially are a military organization that is out on the cop on the beat. We're the local firehouse. We do that every day. As such, another Allen aphorism, he used to call us the universal translator. We spoke military and we spoke law enforcement. We are, through our daily work, much more heavily aligned in the United States with local law enforcement, state, local, federal, than we are necessarily with the DoD military, the other 4 armed services. Our link to them typically occurs out of hemisphere when we're doing work with foreign navies. But the reason I bring that up is to say that both with the recent change in Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy, removal of that policy, and previously with the integration of women into the military, the Coast Guard benefited from the fact that civil law enforcement had done this already, had been there. So we were pretty comfortable in that operating environment. It was a lot easier for us, and our culture kind of went that way. I would say, having lived through both of those transitions, remarkably smooth.
I just want to have a addendum. So I was looking at promotion statistics, something I'm very interested in, like human capital kind of stuff. And so today, and it's shifted recently in the last couple of years, but I think women still make up 10 to 15% of the military, maybe up to 20% in certain sectors. But in the Air Force Officer Corps, I think up to the captain, major, and like lieutenant colonel rank, women are still get promoted at higher rates than men do. So I think, like the culture is, it's only a few percent, but it's statistically significant that they are performing their male peers, slightly within the.
And I would probably add to that, and I'd be interested in Katrina's perspective from where you were sitting too. But within the Coast Guard, we have this. We just because of the nature of the missions we perform, and the fact that we're not in the Department of Defense, there are no restrictions on where women can serve in the Coast Guard. Period. So we are fully integrated across the force in terms of where women can serve, which obviously, if certain assignments are restricted, that in turn has consequences for career and for your promotion statistics and for the ultimate results that Tobias was just talking about. Did you see that sort of combat restriction thing? How was that in your experience?
Well, on my drive in here on NPR, they had this whole panel of women because Congress is recently changing it to allow, and I don't know exactly what it is, but they're allowing more women in more of a combat role, which is sort of ridiculous because there's so many women that are already doing that in that combat role. I do completely agree with you, especially in the Army. Think of the Army, think of the head generals in the Army, and they're all male because most of them, and if you come out of, West Point, you come out of ROTC, you have to choose, one of your top 3 choices has to be combat arms. And women are not allowed in combat arms. And that's infantry, armor, and field artillery. There's a sector of field artillery that women are allowed in, but it's not the fighting sector. And so I as the war in Afghanistan and Iraq, because of the nature of it, women are in combat, especially military police women. They're doing the same types of jobs as some of the infantry guys, but they're not getting the credit. You're not getting that, there is a glass ceiling in the Army because of that combat arms. You want, your top advisors to be an infantry guy who's able to, been there kicking down doors. And women don't have, even though they've been forced to do it in a lot of places. And in my brigade, we had women, out there on missions for weeks at a time with their male counterparts. And it was, again, it's like they didn't, when you're out there, when you're in a truck, it doesn't matter whether you're a woman or a man. Like, can you fight? Can you hold your weapon? It really didn't matter. And I don't think the people around, and especially the women that were out there for weeks at a time, I was not. It was, one day out, one day back. And they had, I'd ask them, how is it? And they're coming back completely dust covered and everything. And they're like, it's fine. We're there to get the mission done. Like, no one thinks of the woman-man sort of scenario. But I think that there's a huge roadblock for women not being allowed to participate in, I went to airborne school. I don't know if I would have loved to have gone to Ranger school, but when I was 22, I think I might have been able to do it. I was, I'm still in pretty good athletic shape, and I need like 2 hours of sleep a night, and according to my father, that was the biggest thing, is not sleeping. And, I would have loved to have been able to try to do that, and women aren't allowed to go to Ranger school. And again, they have this whole discussion of, well, the average woman can't carry an 80-pound ruck. Well, the average woman in the Army might be able to carry an 80-pound ruck, and give them the opportunity, because without that experience, you're never going to make it to being a 4-star general.
So this is probably the point where we should say that we're not speaking in an official spokesperson.
Right,
point.
yes. I should have said that at the beginning. Speaking on my own behalf is Katrina Johnson.
Disclaimer, disclaimer, disclaimer.